Hello and welcome to Goa Arts and Literature Festival 2016. Here we have with us Cyprian Fernandes, an author and a journalist with 56 years of experience in the field of journalism. Hello, sir.
Hello, Gina.
Sir, could you tell us more about your debut novel, Yesterday in Paradise?
Yesterday in Paradise is basically a memoir, so to speak, but being a journalist, I don't write memoirs. It's a journey right from the moment I was virtually born in Kenya to when I left, when I was forced to leave Kenya. It really is I've written it in chapters that basically had a headline to each of them. And the first chapter basically is the migrancy of Goans from Goa to East Africa, to Kenya. And it focuses on our prejudices. The good part was our religious prejudice, and more importantly, the kind of people we were. I mean, we built churches, we built schools, we were educators, we were the greatest civil servants the world has seen, and we ran the country. The next part of it basically is very much what I did as a young man, leaving school at the age of 13. And then my first job was in a bank. Need a retake for that. Was in a bank, and I worked there for 9 months simply because I was in charge of a machine room where we tabulated accounts, and I was silly enough to allow the girls to go early one day because that was the day we did our trial balance, and some smart cookie managed to hide $1 million shillings. We found them, but we had to call the boss in, and he was really pissed off. But he looked at me the next day and he said, "Mr. Fisherman, the figures that are going on in your head are not necessarily those that the bank is interested in." So I said goodbye to that, went to work in a stockroom, and there were about 5 or 6 Goans there. After 2 months, I bought myself a magnificent Italian black and white, black spotted coat. And they were so pissed off because they'd been working there for years, donkey's years, and they didn't ever buy a coat like that. So they sacked me. Then I became a juvenile probation officer. Okay. And the first day in court, the prosecutor said, "Madam, Your Honor, this would be an ideal case for probation." And she was sort of 4 by 4 square. The head didn't have a neck, it just sat on her shoulders. Beautiful, lovely woman, became a mentor of mine. And she said that day, "Why isn't ever, when you need one, there is a probation officer?" And I put my hand up and I said, "Your Honor." And she said, What? Are you a relative of the accused?" I said, "No, Your Honor, I am the probation officer." And she said, "My God, they breed them so young these days." But from that day on, she became my mentor, and she gave me a really great grounding in courts and the law, which became very handy when I became a journalist. Mm-hmm. And then I became, after that probation service thing, I looked at it and I said, all I'm doing is acting. This isn't real life. I'm about 14, 15 years old, and I'm telling men of 40 and 50 and 60 to please explain why you've lost X number of probationers. And really taking them to task. And I just felt I was living a lie, and I needed to go back to square one. Square one for me was being either a lawyer, Mr. Perry Mason, because I'd read him to death, or becoming an investigative journalist because one of my headmasters had given me a copy of the Times, which was then the most ugliest newspaper on earth, and a copy of the Sydney Morning Herald. But I read both of those and made my mind up that one day I was going to have my name in those papers. Yeah, of course. Well, that's my story so far.
Sir, in Kenya, you were described as one of the best investigative journalists. So, can you share with us your journey as an investigative journalist?
It's quite a simple journey, anyway.
Simple.
It is simple because we all do it in life. It happens. We do it all the time. We ask questions. We are inquisitive. We want to find out why. Why did it happen? When did it happen? Why did someone do something? Why did someone do? Why didn't it do the opposite? It's really a matter of probing what you think is essentially the core of a story to come. It is believing utterly and completely in your instincts and giving full value to your instincts and pursuing doggedly, without hesitation, without question, without looking over your shoulder, without worrying about your boss, without worrying about your compatriots, just going ahead and approaching the person or approaching the various people and asking them the pertinent questions without being afraid. The first thing is instinct. Then to understand basically what kind of risk analysis you've got to do. You approach the subject, you've got some hint of the subject. Before you do that, you've got to ask why, what, where, how, which, etc., to get the essence of the story. When you have the essence of the story, you need to take it a little further because there'll be little things that you need to fill in, etc., Right? I mean, you take, like in television, you shut the camera off and go and have a think about it and put in some off-takes and in-takes and out-takes and butt-takes and not-takes and like that, things like that. And then you have to ask yourself one question: what is the worst thing that can happen if I go ahead with the story that I have? And you will get some answers from that. What is the worst thing that can happen if I don't go ahead with that story? And there will be some answers to that. You will have a resolution of what you've done. Then you'll have a solution to your process of investigation. And then you'll have a decision. And decision will come, what's the worst thing that can happen? But as a journalist, there is one fundamental thing. You must never be untrue to yourself.
Yeah.
Never. And you must never be afraid of a living thing. Man, after all, is a man, and a woman, after all, is a woman. We're all flesh and blood. There is every chance they might kill us, but they won't destroy us. There'll be another person to take our place, because truth will always be sacred, and we are the masters and mistresses, and the servants and the shepherds, and the saviors of truth. For the truth shall make you free.
Journalism has changed a lot throughout the years. So are you happy with the kind of stories that are coming out now as to how it was before in your good old days?
This is the darkest moment journalism has ever faced in the history of the world. We have been corrupted almost beyond resurrection. We have lost our soul to the advertising dollar. Companies, we have also lost the art of investigative journalism. Newspapers cannot afford to spend large sums of money on sending reporters around the world within the city or in the suburbs to investigate stories. Today on the net, we plagiarize each other's stories publicly. And we abuse it to the point where we take whole chunks and say, I wrote it, when we didn't. Advertisers basically say, if you chase that story, I'm going to pull my advertising. Governments say, if you don't keep away from that story, we're going to blow your license. There are threats from virtually every corner of the world. And I really don't know where we're going to go with this. There seems to me that there will come a time when the world will realize that we cannot live without truth. We, both in India, in Africa, and other parts of the world, corruption and bribery has basically not only become endemic, not only become a way of life, it is the second religion, or the third religion, and sometimes the first religion. And the problem with that basically is when young men of 14, 16, 26, 28 say, both in India and Africa, that it's okay to have bribery, it's okay to have corruption. A friend of mine rang me up from Nairobi a few weeks ago and said to me that there had been a study in India and Kenya of young men, and those were their answers, that it was okay to have corruption, okay to have bribery. And he said to me that the standard living wage in Kenya had not moved for 5 years. And I said, yeah, okay, but there is a thing called TKK in Kenya. It's called Toa Kitu Kidogo. That means give me something small. So I said, what about TKK? Oh, he said, that's been going up 15% a year. He might have been joking, but there is some truth in that. My biggest fear is that we, the people, We are the people who are the sacred guardians of the truth. Nations, all nations, the world is killing the truth. We have to. Now the problem basically is we, the generation that is handing the current world to you guys, what kind of a world are we handing to you as far as journalism is concerned? When, we're gone, we are yesterday's people. But what kind of a world are we handing on to you guys? And it is a question that we journalists have got to ask almost every day at every opportunity of anyone who is involved, A, in producing newspapers, in publishing newspapers, in government, in public affairs, wherever. What are you doing to the truth? Why are you killing the truth? And how can we live like this? This is congenital suicide of news and the truth, because we can't do anything about it, because we don't own the newspapers.
Do you think that the journalists nowadays still have the courage and integrity to bring out the truth, or do you think they are falling prey to the political and corporate pressures?
I think at a very young age, let's just take this week. I've met a lot of young people who are aspiring to be journalists. They have the spirit of the newborn child as far as journalism is concerned. Yeah. They're absolutely innocent of any sins. They're absolutely innocent of any crime. They're absolutely innocent of any prejudice. They're just hungry to do the right thing. But if you look at newspapers around the world, if you look at radio, if you look at television, there is something called envelopmental journalism, yes, which is bribery. You give somebody a brown paper bag and he'll write glorious things about you because he's already spoken to your boss. And he's already promised your boss 10 million crores of advertising. So how can I actually say to young people, yes, there is great hope for you? What I need to do instead is talk to people who actually run newspapers and say to them, guys, you're killing us. Back to that old story again. But as young journalists, it is sacred upon you to keep trying. There is an argument that we are now filling the spaces left by advertisements, yes, on pages. Yes. It was something that was said 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's becoming true. But as journalists, we've still got to find news and elements of news that are actually sensational and will attract readers. There's a very important presentation that was done by Barreto Xavier. Unfortunately, he read it for 23 pages, and everything, all the valuable things that he said was lost in the inordinate time. And his main message was, what is truth? Is truth the message sent out by advertisers? Is truth the message paid by advertisers? Is truth the message sent out by governments who have their own political aims and ends? What is the truth that we're getting today? And what is the truth the journalists are providing? How clean is the truth the journalists are providing? There is an insular issue as well, because we're all victims of this murder by power. So, to answer your question, I think there are a lot of journalists who would like to do the right thing. There are a lot of journalists in India who are still doing the right thing. There are journalists around the world who are still winning Pulitzer Prizes and fortunately getting through. But there are fewer and fewer journalists who are being allowed to do that.
Okay, so sir, what would be your advice for the young budding journalists in the field of investigative journalism?
Not only investigative journalism, any kind of journalism. Keep the faith. Be true to our mantra, that we believe in the truth, and that we will write the truth, that we will serve the truth, and we will share that with our people. Not for 1 second waver from that. Yeah. Every editor that you face, you have to tell him that we have a sacred duty to present the truth and nothing but the truth. No favor, no prejudice, nothing under the table, nothing over the table. the truth and nothing but the truth.
Only the truth.
Only the truth.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
It was
you.
nice talking to you.
It is entirely my pleasure to have been with you guys. I wish you every blessing, every success, every achievement. And along the way, I hope you have a lot of fun. I hope you guys rock and the world treats you with a great deal of respect.
Thank you
And
so
each
much.
of you, I hope your names will be in lights. And I can say, hey, I met those guys one day, a long time ago in Goa, in Dona Paulo. Thank you very, very much for doing me this kindness.
Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.
We were in conversation with Cyprian Fernandes at the Goa Arts and Literature Festival. Stay tuned in for more interviews.